Hello, and welcome to our webinar on Protect, Detect, and Respond, and how we go about securing the smart grid. We're delighted to be part of the 2020 digital edition of Power Europe. We've got a great set of speakers lined up today. We start with Oleksandr Khmelnytskoblenergo. Oleksandr is Head of System Administration and Information Security for Khmelnytskoblenergo. My name is John Wells. I'm the Chairman of the Technical Committee for the OSGP Alliance. And we have Emil Gurevitch, who's Director of Security Solutions at Networked Energy Services. So I will hand over to Emil, who will take us through the agenda for today.
Today's agenda. I will introduce the overall theme of our presentation. Then I will do some role-playing and look at the smart grid from the attacker's perspective. Oleksandr will then provide the defender's perspective, and then I will give you a taste of what a modern threat detection solution looks like, and then close with a summary. The smart grid is a complex system. I'm oversimplifying, but it is basically a computer with an electricity grid, not an electricity grid with a computer. Traditionally, there has been a lot of focus on securing the medium to high voltage parts of the smart grid. In particular, the SCADA for substation control systems have enjoyed a lot of attention from security experts. However, the low voltage part of the grid is often overlooked and misunderstood from a risk perspective. The smart metering infrastructure, which is an integral part of the low voltage grid, provides a utility with a number of benefits and capabilities. A utility can remotely turn off power to a customer's house or business. The data received from the low voltage grid helps automate processes like billing, grid health management, and much, much more. It is often the eyes of the grid. It also connects a utility to customers behind the meter. And finally, this physical infrastructure is not static. It's dynamic in the sense that you can use the remote firmware update capability to teach it new tricks or send security fixes, just like your smartphone or any other computing device. This significantly improves the return on investment as you can, as you can reuse the same physical grid infrastructure for 15 to 20 years before you need to start replacing physical components in the field. Of course, these capabilities can also be used by attackers. With the on-off switch, attackers can inflict power outages. By tampering with data or making it unavailable, they can disrupt critical processes. And they can also use the remote update feature to hijack or brick the physical infrastructure. So failing to secure these capabilities can not just impact the energy company's bottom line, but also impact normal people like you and I. We all rely on power grids. So how do we approach the problem of securing smart grids? The right overall approach to securing a smart grid is to focus not just on blocking attackers from misusing the smart grid, but also to make sure that we're able to detect and respond to breaches when they do get in, because they will get in. It doesn't matter how many zones you have built around your assets, or which frameworks you have used, or how many standards or certifications your processes or products have been awarded. History has shown that breaches will happen. So the faster we can adapt to and shut down cyber attacks, the less impact it will have. That's the goal. That's how you get a truly resilient smart grid. Protect, detect, respond.
Thanks, Emil, for that opening. I think that really sets the scene well and illustrates that cybersecurity in the smart grid is already becoming a key issue, especially in the low voltage grid. Before Emil takes us through the attacker's perspective, I'd just like to introduce a little bit of Emil's history. Emil actually spent some of his time looking at security in some of the world's larger utility networks. In fact, an engagement a couple of years ago required Emil to literally put on the attacker's perspective and effectively test out the security offered by smart meter solutions. So the experience that you're going to hear actually comes direct from Emil's experience of being a attacker, albeit an ethical attacker, to test out the security of various DSOs networks. So with that said, I'll hand back over to Emil. Thank you.
Here is an incomplete timeline of some of the high-profile global attacks that either directly or indirectly impacted the energy sector in the past 6 years. We do not have time to go through each of them, but there are 3 observations that I'd like to make. We're seeing a mix of state-sponsored attacks like Indestroyer and Black Energy, which Oleksandr will talk to as well, and ransomware attacks causing critical impact on operations and uptime like Petya, WannaCry, and most recently, NetWalker, which was a ransomware attack on a Pakistan power supplier. My second observation is that attacks are getting more sophisticated in the sense that criminals are coming up with new creative ways to milk their intrusions for money, and they're getting deeper and deeper into our systems. And the third observation I'd like to make is that the analytics and threat detection continues to be a top priority for the top security teams around. Given the difficulty of locking everything down, this trend makes a lot of sense. So, to summarize, attackers continue to attack the energy sector, and they continue to delve deeper into critical systems like smart grids. It is therefore crucial that we as an industry take a proactive approach instead of waiting to become 6 o'clock news. Now, who are these attackers? Let's take a look. I'm often asked, who would want to hack the low voltage grid, or who would want to hack smart meters? Let's tackle those questions. On your right, you see a graph that is used to characterize so-called threat actors, which is just a fancy word for saying the person or people behind an attack. The further right, the higher the skill. The further up, the stronger the focus. I have plotted 2 different types of threat actors here. At the top right, you see the nation state. This is a very sophisticated attacker with deep pockets and a very skilled team. Nation states tend to focus only on one specific target, which is why you find them on the top here. At the bottom left, you see the criminal threat actor. This actor may not be as advanced skill-wise as the nation state, but they still create significant impact as the timeline before clearly shows. Now, there are of course other types of threat actors like hacktivists and hobbyists and other ists, but criminals and nation state are the 2 actors that I have front in mind when I'm asked who is behind these attacks. So, now that we have an idea of who is behind the attack, let's go through some actual attacks. I have prepared 3 different scenarios. The first scenario is that we are a hacking group working for a nation state. Our mission is to inflict power outages. After months of reconnaissance, we have identified the path of least resistance. We have found that the SCADA for substation control was very well protected, which is why we have turned our focus on the smart metering system for this mission. Step 1. We breached the utility's IT using traditional techniques and procedures. So we're using publicly available information from LinkedIn and other open source sources to design a targeted spear phishing campaign. And through our campaign, we get an initial foothold. Then we pivot our way through the systems and end up at the control center of the smart metering system. Step 2 is that we wait until the weekend, and we wait until the load on the grid is very high. Once it's high, we start sending out a massive amount of disconnect commands to the meters in the field. And then we watch as thousands of meters in the grid respond to our request and disconnect the power to people's homes and businesses. But during this, we hit a safety guard in the system, which prevents us from sending out further disconnect commands from the control center. But we're a nation state, we trained for this, and we know different ways of turning power off through the smart metering system. One of the ways that we found that worked was to reconfigure the safety thresholds on the meter, causing them to self-disconnect, which worked. So we complete our mission. Now there's a few takeaways from here that I like to emphasize. Nation states have the skills to adapt to defenders. We saw here that we as attackers ran into a roadblock, but because of our skill set, we were able to bypass it. 2, We achieved our mission by taking advantage of the smart metering system, the low voltage smart grid, not the more well-defended SCADA for substation control system. And thirdly, this is what I like to call the top-down attack, where attackers attack the smart grid from inside the central operations. Right, time for our next operation. In this operation, we again work for a nation state. Our mission is to slowly derail the target's grid automation and control processes by tampering with the sensor data that these processes rely on. This basically means that we want to become the eyes of the central operational center and feed them lies without being detected. Step one is that we hack into a select number of control nodes. And control nodes are field devices that manage smart meters and other edge devices. They're usually connected up to a private telco network, but we're a nation state, so we have very good connections to telco networks that we leverage. We then develop a control node exploit which gets us administrative access to these nodes in the field. So step two, we now have access to these control nodes. We use those compromised control nodes to tamper with the sensor data bubbling up from the smart meters. We make control changes that makes it look like there are grid health problems when there are not, and we hide actual problems. We do it in a very subtle manner so as to not expose ourselves. We don't need to cause a short-term derailment or disruption. We're looking for a long-term gain. And then step three is just to sit back and watch how the utility uses our tampered data to derail their own processes. And we complete our mission. This is the middle up attack. Right, on to our third operation. In this operation, we are a criminal group. We want to cash out as much as possible without getting caught. Our mission is to take control of the smart metering infrastructure and essentially sell it back to the utility. Step one is that we use the criminal marketplace to hire a malware developer and ask them to write an exploit for the smart meters in our grid. This will cost us a bit upfront, but we're convinced that we can get a very healthy return of our investment here. Step two is that now we have a working exploit for smart meters. We then go to a very densely populated area, a city center, for example, and we use the exposed remote interface of the smart meters to install our malware on them. Usually, most smart meters are connected to a network, and that's the network that we use as our attack vector to compromise them. So step three is that after we have walked, literally we are walking the streets of cities. We're not in some IT system. We're on the streets hacking smart meters. So after a few days of that, we have successfully compromised thousands of meters, and they are now under our control. We then contact the utility and demand a ransom in return for these meters. We threaten to leak energy consumption data, which is considered private data in EU. We threaten to brick the devices so the utility has to replace them. And we shut off power to a couple of customers to get the utility's attention. We have a lot of leverage here in our ransom negotiations. And in this case, the utility pays us the ransom and we complete our mission of cashing out. So in all of these scenarios, I make a lot of assumptions about the protective layers of this smart metering system that we're dealing with, that we're hacking into. But again, as the overall theme of our presentation, we should not rely on these protective layers. We should not see these scenarios as science fiction. They can and probably will happen. So we need to invest in proper detection. This concludes the attacker's perspective part of our presentation. I really hope you have, I have given you a better understanding of attacks on the low voltage grid from a practical standpoint and why we need to be much better at proactively defending them instead of waiting to get hacked. Now I will hand it over to Oleksandr to provide us with the defender's perspective.
Thank you, Emil. Hello, everybody. My name is Oleksandr, and originally I'm from Ukraine, country that has had very big cybersecurity issues in recent years. If you look at the last meter attack for ICS software list, you will find many references to Ukraine. Some of them, as Emil already said, are the Khmelnytskoblenergo in 2015 and NotPetya in 2017. The Khmelnytskoblenergo was the first confirmed cyber attack that led to a power outage in history. In the same time, NotPetya showed us on the power of dependencies to our suppliers. Also, there are evidences of further development of the black energy in Ukraine, the so-called gray energy. With such an historical background, now we are heading to the smart grids. What conclusions were made? We are paying regular attention to cybersecurity while using computers for work, information sharing, and web surfing in IT. We have created and implemented cyber strategies, missions, and visions. We have done the identification of the cyber risks, their prioritization, and had determined what to do with them: accept, transfer, mitigate, share. The cybersecurity in OT was near the center, in the high and medium voltage grid. However, as of today, digitalization is getting further into the OT. Smart grids are here. Therefore, IT staff have to think about security of substations and customers. But almost no one has experience in these conditions. You have to understand how the OT operates, because any cybersecurity measures in these systems must not impede safe, reliable power system operations. What and how you have to do to protect the converged network of OT and IT. As Emil already said, the attacker is highly motivated because for him it's either money or a game for money. In the same time, defender is a person who sits in the same place every day and does monotonous work. He is monitoring his network. He is bored. Every day he watches the same picture and knows nothing about the new system he must now protect. They just connected it to an existing network, IT network, and said, now the dispatcher is able to control our newly built smart grid. But the attack surface has massively increased, and in case of attack, defender is very limited in time. So what should a defender pay attention to? Of course, for attacker, the idea comes from the possibility of distortion of billing data, the possibility of disconnecting consumers. You just have 100 or even thousands of devices ready for hijacking. However, in OT, the most important is safety criteria. The problem is that usually a cybersecurity system is built to comply with the requirements of ISO 27000, which does not take into account safety criteria. So we must include it to our existing cybersecurity strategy when adding new interconnections between IT and OT environments. And I think it's quite a challenge. If you wouldn't pay attention to safety in OT, someone, for example, can disable smart grid security mechanisms, and it can result in electric shock to personnel or bystanders, or even someone's death. In OT, you can't just protect, you have to save lives. Okay, we got a new system, smart grid, connected to our computer network. Now defender needs tools to monitor events in the low voltage network. For example, in case of disabled certain security mechanism. If adversary is successful, you will lose visibility or even control of your system. So how defender, how to prevent it for Defender. In this slide you can see a comparison of tools available in the market. There are plenty of them for the IT and very limited tools for the OT. For example, I don't know the cybersecurity tools for the infrastructure level of converged IT and OT network. Neither I do know firms that would do the cybersecurity audit of such systems. Also, there is one but here. Traditional cybersecurity tools, familiar for us from the IT world, can be proactive, automatic or even proactive. For example, intrusion prevention systems. For example, in case of cyber event, a system based on certain criteria in the automatic mode can classify it as an incident and perform certain actions. For example, isolate a certain segment of the network and alert the staff. The epidemic was warned off, now it's your turn. Can we add similar proactive elements of cyber defense to our low voltage network? Or instead, it may be better to add the maximum possible level of cyber defense to every smart grid element, prevent it from transmitting and receiving certain commands from non-usual nodes, add up-to-date encryption to information streams, and add a passive monitoring element such as intrusion detection systems for the smart grid, which will alert duty personnel something out of the ordinary happens. And after that, the staff, using their own experience, will analyze what to do to minimize damage to both the system and to personnel and the people. Also, I want to mention one more thing about ICS. We are using ICS for a long time, but historically they weren't connected to the IT, and many of them never got an update. Nor the firmwares of the endpoints, neither the dispatchers' working PCs. Nowadays, we connect these PCs, this ICS as a whole system, to the IT environment. We connect it to get the ability for faster operability, interconnection, and so on. But have anybody prior to the connection such an old system to the network did an update to it? Or did anybody security audit of the elements and of the code for the system? Maybe somebody have made a risk assessment for it in new circumstances. So prepare in advance for new challenges, plan before building, do not build static castles, and be proactive. Study because hackers do.
Thanks for that, Oleksandr. That was a really interesting insight into the defender's perspective. What we're going to do now is look at how practical examples of detection can be used to address some of the scenarios that Emil discussed under the attacker's perspective. So we'll see how tooling can help the defender to complement their protection layers and be able to detect when there's suspicious activity, when there's actual changes in threat, and when there are attacks taking place. So back over to you, Emil. Thank you.
On the right, you see the top-down attack from earlier, where we breach the utility through their IT systems and then attack the grid from within the control center. On the left, you see the defender's view of the attack through our threat detection solution. This is what the incident response team would be looking at. Note that it is not an ocean of events, but rather a concise incident report. Most importantly, you don't have to be a security expert to understand the report and take action. At the top, you see a summary of the incident. This gives us, the incident response team, a quick overview of the incident at its current state. It includes impact, indicators of compromise, etc. In the attack map, we see where the attack is coming from, or more importantly, where it isn't coming from. This gives me as an incident responder a quick overview of where I should be focusing my time and resources. Our threat detection solution will also provide a good starting point as to what the next steps should be. This is extremely helpful for response teams that haven't dealt with a cyber attack like this before. Super helpful to have a few basic next steps to grasp onto. Our threat detection will also provide a timeline, just like any good threat detection solution should. This timeline clearly shows the origin of the attack and how it evolved over time. Again, key information for responding to an attack effectively. Here we see the bottom-up attack from earlier. The layout of the incident report here is exactly the same. Consistency and clarity is very important for response teams. If we take a look at the attack map, in this case, it is very clear that the attacks are coming from the external part of the grid. Again, right off the bat, I know where to focus my time and resources. In this specific incident, the timeline is extremely important. As a responder, I can look at the timeline and know exactly which meters in my field are compromised and when they were compromised. I can pull out the serial numbers of the meters, then take those serial numbers and plot them in my geographical system, GIS, and get physical addresses. I can then take these addresses and work with local law enforcement in trying to find the criminals behind the attack. Chances are the criminals were caught on a camera somewhere. Detection goes both ways. This was a short preview of the threat detection solution that we provide at NIST. For more information, please go to networkedenergy.com. Before we close, I want to leave you with a few visual metaphors for the key points we covered today. Let's take a closer look at this photo. We all know we protect our goal in soccer, but at this game, our protection was insufficient. The attacker scored on us. From a security perspective, who do you think is the most important person here? The goalie? A defender? The attacker? Not quite. If you answered the person that took the photo, then you would be right. From this photo alone, we gain a lot of information. We can identify the attacker that scored. We know the attackers got in the top left of our goal. We can see that our defenders were not prepared for this. So we know how to improve. And most importantly, we know we were breached and we have a weakness in our defense. And now it's time to get to work on our defense. Like Oleksandr said, let's not build static castles or think that our protective layers are sufficient. We need to assume smart grids will be breached, and therefore we need to invest in timely detection and response. Protect, detect, respond. And finally, let's not sit back and wait. Let's act proactively and defend the electricity grids that we so critically rely on.
Thank you. So that leaves me with nothing more to do than to thank Oleksandr and Emil for the excellent presentation on protection, detection, and response in the smart grid with those excellent practical examples. We're now open for taking questions. Thank you.